Hi, I'm Roy Crown from Revelation Trust, and welcome to Gospel Entrepreneurs. In this podcast, I speak to leaders in the church, community, and business who are using their entrepreneurial spirit to share the good news of the gospel wherever they find themselves. And I'm thrilled that in today's conversation, I'm joined by Laura Brett, who lives just outside Leeds, a place called Harrogate. She is a passionate evangelist. You'll pick that up from the conversation. She's an ambassador with Revelation Trust and an evangelism consultant with the Filler Station. So sit back and enjoy this conversation. Hi, Laura.
Hi, Roy. Thank you for having me.
It's great to have you. So you live in Harrogate with your family. Give us a little bit of that first, Laura.
Yeah, sure. I'm a mum of three teenagers, 19, nearly 18 and nearly 16, and my husband, Rob. And we have two Labradors and a cat. And we've been here about 22 years. I'm a southerner, really.
Okay, so let's go back to the southerner. Tell us a bit of your story and a bit of your faith story so that people know who we're talking to today, Laura. That'd be great.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I always like to start sort of way back to show sort of how my family became Christians, really. I had a grandfather who I was particularly fond of. He was a professional footballer, and he became a Christian in the changing rooms at Brentford Football Club. And he was taken to a Billy Graham rally, and he gave his life to Christ. I always feel that's so important because obviously if it hadn't been for that, then he wouldn't have taken my mother to church. And as a consequence, she took us to church. And I had a really lovely sort of childhood, sort of growing up, learning about Jesus. But to be honest, it all felt a little bit boring, a little bit irrelevant to my life. And then at the age of 11, I got the chance to go to the local Baptist church. They had a really good youth scene there, good girls' brigade, good boys' brigade. I quite fancied the drummer, so that kind of helped. He ended up being my husband, by the way. And we all went to a big youth camp, and 7 of us were baptized, full immersion, including my husband, Rob. So it was a really, really special time growing up, but that's how it all started for me.
So you became a Christian as a teenager, would you say?
That's right. Yeah, I was 13. You probably remember there was a big, it's called the Big Event in Southend-on-Sea. I'm sure you probably remember. I think it was 1992. And a big sort of American evangelist called Floyd McClung. He was living in Amsterdam at the time, working amongst the prostitutes, and he took his family there. And I remember it was twofold for me, my conversion really, because I remember as a 13-year-old thinking, wow, what a sacrifice to move from America and go over there and, sacrifice all that he had to go and work in that area. But also my heart was really broken at that point for the least, the last, the lost. And I think that's where my journey started, sort of my heart broken for women and fighting and being an advocate for women. But yeah, it was very significant. He prayed the salvation prayer with me, and it was wonderful.
And obviously, this is Gospel Entrepreneurs. We've got the faith story, but you're also a little bit of an entrepreneur in your early ages, weren't you, Laura? You kind of did some little businesses on the side.
I was really, and you've been good for me, Roy, because you've helped me to reflect on all of that. I think a lot of things we do in life, we don't even realise we're doing it. But yeah, I remember as a young child member at school, and I remember in the youth club, we would make like tuck shops and buy stuff, sell stuff, make a little bit of a profit. And then also there's a bit of a gap between me and my younger brother. And as a consequence, I sort of looked after him a little bit after school for my mum. And we used to do sort of holiday clubs and after school clubs. And I charged my mother for that. So yeah, it was definitely in me an opportunity to make a few pence.
And Laura, just moving on then, so passionate, encountered Christ, and then you were passionate about sharing faith, weren't you? It was just kind of part of you. That kind of evangelist was in you right at the start, wasn't it?
Always, yeah. I've always been an evangelist. Sometimes you have to reflect back on your life and you realize when it all started. But straight away, when I was saved, I just wanted everybody to know who Jesus was and what he'd done for me and what he'd done for others. And it was literally like the penny dropping. It was like, oh, I get it. He's the ransom. He's what we need to believe in order to enter the holy presence of the Lord. And I've just always been an evangelist.
And then obviously you're passionate for the gospel, sharing faith, particularly one-on-one. I know you preach and teach, but you just would go and share, and that's what you do. But then you trained as a midwife, is that right? That was what you did?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I did a little bit in business for a while and then had my children. And then it was a real calling to become a midwife. I just remember I had sort of various God encounters where he was just showing me the way. I remember one particular one at New Wine. I was there as a sort of young mum of young children, sort of up to my eyeballs in nappies and goodness knows what else. And I used to have these tingling in my fingers when I went for ministry. And I remember Mark Carey, he prayed for me and he said, I really think you're birthing something, Laura, and you're going to do something amazing with your hands. And as he said that, I sort of almost felt sort of like contractions all over again. And it was amazing because it was very prophetic, because he didn't know that I was actually testing and sort of trying out the course of midwifery and going into midwifery. And then everything fell into place very easily. It's a very difficult course to get onto, but I just knew that the Lord wanted me to do it, and he just opened doors, and I trained as a midwife in 2009, 2010.
Brilliant. And then you obviously changed that, but you set up an organisation. Was it called Press Red or something, Laura? What's that story?
Yeah, so I was in midwifery and I specialised in mental health midwifery. I worked alongside women that were sort of trafficked, dealing with sort of female genital mutilation, domestic abuse, all of that, severe mental health problems. And I felt the Lord sort of prompting me to sort of lay that down. And that was really sacrificial. But I just thought, I need to lay this down for a season. And so I did, and I handed back my registration to the NMC. I did a little bit of teaching and coaching in schools, first of all, in mental health and sort of sexual education with children, but from a really biblical stance. I mean, that was amazing how the Lord let me do that through the Archbishop's Trust and various others. And then I met Angie Michelle Hawthorne, and she'd already set up Press Red. And they were looking for somebody to sort of develop it from sort of, it wasn't a charity at that point. They wanted it to be, and they had vision and everything. And it was kind of like the answer to my prayers at that point. That's the kind of thing I wanted to do. And so we had a conversation, and I became the head of development, working alongside her and the CEO to reach its potential.
And what did you learn in that season? Because that was a very different space to what you'd been in before, and kind of setting up a trust, a charity, linking with people on a very specific, real painful need, really, for girls, women, in that way.
Yeah, sure. I was able to sort of reflect on all my experience. I think God's amazing, isn't he? The way, you look through your whole course of your life and everything is in that toolbox for that moment in time. And even my conversion, of course, was all about that, the oppression of women and violence and everything. And then obviously working midwifery, working with women of that demographic, that obviously brought a lot into it, made it very real. I'd had an experience when I was a teenager as well, so it was I was able to sort of reflect upon that. And just all the things that I needed was great in that space. But I was also beginning to realise, I mean, people had said, Laura, you have a voice. I'd use that voice. And like you said, Roy, often it was on the one-to-one. I love evangelizing one-to-one, street evangelism. It's fantastic, going to people, talking to them. But I thought I had a voice for like a higher remit. And in that space, it was great. It was kind of like my first sort of experience of like going to the House of Lords and went to the House of Parliament. I was at advocates and things. Yes, speaking to that political sphere a bit. So yeah, it was a great time working with some wonderful people. And then when I left that, about 2 years later, they'd reached charitable status. We'd sort of developed some films with Elaine Stalkey based on her book, and some resources for the church. I was doing sort of like gatherings in churches and various spaces, sort of like talking about oppression against women and mental health. So that was that season.
And obviously, people listening, there's been a thread through everything that you've done that you've put back to when you actually encountered Christ, isn't it? It's kind of almost that it at your born again experience, there was birth something that this is going to be the thread of your life. Do you think that's true for most people listening, that they need to look at that and just reflect on that? Because that's really significant in what God opens up to you and what you find yourself doing, particularly in your life.
Sure, 100%. I really think so. I think, God is strategic and he has plans to prosper us and to give us a future. And I do think if we stop and pause sometimes and just think about what's gone on in our life, what has he given us? What's our experience? What's in our hand? What's our passion? What breaks our heart? He opens doors. And fundamentally, we have to trust in him in that. And sometimes that means making decisions which don't kind of seem right in the natural. Sometimes it means sort of it's sacrificial. You're giving up maybe careers that are more lucrative, or having to cut off relationships with people. I don't know. There's all sorts of things that can seem painful at the time, but actually God does want the best for us. And certainly for me, it's always been this thread of preaching the gospel and being an evangelist and showing people who Jesus is. And of more late, we call it the Christian PhD. I feel like I'm going into the preaching the gospel, but also, the healings and deliverances that go alongside that people don't just believe by what you say, but also by what they see. It's that verse in John 14 where it says, believe in the miracles that have happened. I feel like I'm going into that season now. After Press Red, I had the privilege of leading alongside the trustees a mental health charity in Yorkshire called Wellspring, and I did that over like a maternity leave period. And again, that was great for me because I could use all my experience, I could use all my connections and networks that I made, my training, qualifications in mental health, and just have that experience of kind of co-running a charity, which was great fun.
And Laura, now you're working with Rev Trust, particularly to invest in girls, in finding their entrepreneurial spirit. And it's been really interesting. Most of the things you've done have been with other girls or women. You've kind of all of that space. It's not to say you don't speak to men and engage in men, and obviously you're married, but it's kind of been that way all through your life, hasn't it, really?
It has, yeah. I mean, I love men. I mean, I've got three brothers, and I think when you're an only girl with three brothers, you learn to really get on with boys. But I love to see women making, their full potential. And I also see, there is that gender bias that women often can be. Certainly things like domestic abuse, it's far more weighted that way. But I feel if I can help women to be equipped and released, what can I give them from my experience that will help them to be where they need to be. But I've set up women's groups. I co-set up a group called Sanctuary at our home church in Harrogate, which has been going now probably about 17 years, and that's a women's ministry. I think it's really important to have male ministry and women's ministry separate, as well as coming together. I think we're different, and I think that's okay.
I think it's not only okay, it is true.
It's required, yes.
And it's great that you're partnering with us in kind of establishing that and looking at that. And you've got some young people that you're already engaging with, and we're looking to increase that more, aren't we?
Yeah, I have. I'm really excited about this. So, one of the roles I have now is I work with Roy a day a week, particularly sort of identifying and mentoring and equipping and releasing women sort of in their 20s to 40s age bracket, those that are kind of starting on the journey. Maybe some of them have got a little bit more experience, or maybe they've just come to it later in life, realize they are entrepreneurial. Jesus at the center, Jesus at the face of it. Yeah, just coming alongside them, encouraging them, directing them in the right direction, signposting them, opening doors for them, hopefully. At the moment, I have a couple of ladies that I'm looking after, and I'd obviously like to expand that. I think maybe up to sort of 12 nationally. So we're looking for women in that space. If that might be you, you could get in touch. But it's sort of identifying those that have a real gospel entrepreneurship at their heart. So, that could be in business, it could be in ministry, it could be in church life. But the main thing is that they're entrepreneurial. God was the greatest entrepreneur, wasn't he? He was creative. He challenged the status quo. Somebody challenges the status quo, but keeps kingdom values at the center. I think that's really important.
Exactly, and sees things that are not being done that could be done that they step into. So if you're interested in that, just contact us at revelationtrust.org, and we'd love to make a connection with you. But that's not the only bit that you do with your life. You do a whole stack of other stuff, Laura. Tell us about some of the opportunities that you've seen, because you've created the filling station up in Harrogate. What does that look like? And you work part-time with them.
Yeah, sort of multifaceted, really. So my husband and I, we started the Harrogate filling station in September 19. So we've been going sort of nearly 3 years, or 3 years. So that's part of the filling station network, which is a group of I think we're up to about 75 stations. We're like a church. We're not officially a church, but we're becoming a church. It's a place where people can be renewed, and there's evangelism, and we want to kind of like support leaders as well that are in ministry. So it's a place where they can be filled up. So the spirit-filled worship, there's kind of like an inspiring speaker, and we minister in the gifts of the Holy Spirit. And it typically meets once a month, usually in a non-church place, so like a golf club or a hotel or a barn or something like that. As well as leading the one in Harrogate, I've also recently been appointed as the Evangelist Consultant for the whole network. So that's really exciting. We're doing things like, we've been at the festivals like New Wine. We prayed and prophesied for over 200 church leaders. People are really sort of worn out, aren't they, and burnt out and tired, and they just came and received. It was like going to an oasis. So we want to bless the church, what it's doing. We're also seeing evangelism, and we're seeing healings and deliverances, particularly in Harrogate. We're just, my husband and I had the pleasure of baptizing in the River Eure with some others, 5 new converts on Saturday. It was just amazing. Yeah, it was amazing. And
a bit cold, but amazing.
Yeah, I think it's seasonal. I think we'll find something in an indoor pool for next time. But it was certainly fun in September. Yeah, I think people are having a bit of a spiritual awakening at the moment. So I'm finding evangelism is a totally different space at the moment. If we go into town, I often go out with my friend Victoria, we minister together, and we just talk to people and we pray for them, and they're very open to that. We've had salvations on the streets. There's definitely a shift going on. I would say that revival isn't just coming. I would say revival is here. So that's given me boldness as an evangelist to go and do that, the one-to-one stuff. But yeah, like you say, I also love speaking and preaching and prophesying into people's lives, all of those things.
People that are listening, I don't know where you're coming from. You could be coming from all different spaces and places. And I think what Laura does and what she brings is she steps out into those spaces and places with faith, and God then does some amazing things. And I think there's something in the entrepreneur that kind of says, let's have a go. Let's kind of be that kind of faith orientated. And that's a bit of the entrepreneurial spirit, even in business or in setting up a ministry. Wouldn't you say, Laura, that is part of that? I know a lot of evangelists are entrepreneurs because they kind of, it's part of the evangelistic gift. It's not totally, but there's just something of it in a similar way. But certainly what you've done and where you've done what you've done has been very much that, Laura, isn't it?
Yeah, that's totally right, Roy. I mean, some people say to me, Laura, I could never do that, or you're so bold, or, I've always been a bit of a watchman as well. So kind of I sound the alarm. I've said stuff in the public space, and it's like, well, how can you do that? And I think it's because I think God taught me a long time ago, not to be afraid to fail, and not to worry about what people think. I think that's a massive thing. But like the woman with the alabaster jar, she didn't worry what people thought of her. She just did what God told her to do and trusted him and poured everything out to him. And I've always been a bit like that. Maybe it's a childlike kind of faith quality. I don't know. But yeah, I'm not saying it's not an easy path, but I'd rather be real. I'd rather be bold. I'd rather try. So I'm not afraid to go up to somebody and go, and sort of on the street and say, hi, how are you? Do you know that God loves you? Blah, blah, blah. And they tell me to get lost. I'm not bothered. It doesn't matter. I'd rather do it because actually 9 times out of 10, they're so thankful. It's not being afraid.
And to not do it has got all sorts of consequences. So, like, why wouldn't you do it? It's just got to have a go. But Laura, you're a bit infectious with that as well. So people catch something of the spirit within you as well, don't they? It's kind of caught rather than taught, I think, as well.
I hope so. And I think one of the things that God's given me is like, I feel like sometimes I'm a bridge, so I can sort of, when I'm talking to people, I know all the religiosity and the religious spirit and all the stuff, but I also know the simple faith of just believing and trusting in Jesus and knowing him as your Lord and Savior. And I'm quite good at bringing that stuff, the hard, difficult kind of liturgical stuff and making it simple. And I think maybe that's what makes it attractive and people understand it because they can apply it to their lives. So on the back of Harrogate Filling Station, we set up a Thursday night discipleship group, which is amazing, and it's grown. And it's full of wonderful people who a lot of them have never had a Christian experience before. And we're like straight in, we're doing John, the I am sayings, and they're just loving it because they're hungry. I think as well, a lot of it's about your personal experience and what God has done in your life. And without going into massive detail, a few years ago, us as a family unit went through a really tough time. My husband was quite poorly through a stress-related incident at work, and we ended up going legal, and we had to trust the Lord so much. He took us to a place we never ever thought we'd ever have to go to. He took us to the wire. We saw miracles. I remember at some point, like, we literally had no money left. We couldn't pay our mortgage, and we just got on our knees and we cried and we prayed. And then the miracles came. I remember somebody saying to me once, a great vicar actually, called Gordon Hickson, and he said to me, Laura, you've got to thank God for these moments in your life. Like, rejoice because of them. Because actually it's when you go through that valley, isn't it, of the shadow of death, when God takes you to that place, it's honestly then that you really grow and you never forget it. You become more generous, your whole spirit changes, that you can trust God whatever, he will not let you down. And I think because of that grows in you, and then you just want to give it away all over again. It's like rediscovering our first love. That's what I would say. I think we all need to discover our first love for Jesus, that beautiful feeling when we were first saved. And I suppose something just to leave with the listeners today, I try to, if I can, to pray Psalm 91 every day over my life, over my family. It's a great psalm, and I just want to remind people to do that. It's a psalm of protection. It's a psalm of encouragement. It's prophetic. It tells you what's going to happen. It reminds you of your authority that you have in Jesus. He who is in you is greater than he is in the world. And you can tread on the lion and the cobra, and it's just a great psalm just of blessing and of honor. So I just want to encourage the viewers really to tap into that psalm to remind them of God's love for them.
Thanks, Laura. Psalm 91, read it, reflect on it. Laura, it's been great to chat with you today, and your input has been fantastic.
Thank you.
Thanks, Laura, so much for joining me today. Let's not forget Psalm 91, and let's read it, reflect on it, and pray over it. I'll be back with another gospel entrepreneur next week, but you can catch up on all the previous conversations I've had on the UCB Player app or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks so much for listening today. Gospel Entrepreneurs is a UCB podcast in partnership with the Revelation Trust.